Glad to have you here tonight. We're in the book of Esther and down to chapter 3. Just really beginning that, we left off last week with a reminder here that we look at this, the struggle between the houses of Mordecai and Haman. When we talk about the houses of Mordecai and Haman, the house of talking about Mordecai is the Jewish nation. It's what we're talking about. And of Haman, Haman was an Agagite, an Amalekite. They had been enemies of Israel for many, many years, going all the way back to when they came out of Egyptian bondage and the troubles they had with the Amalekites on the way. And God had told His people, to not forget those people. God's not going to forget them because He's going to bring them into judgment for the way they had treated Israel. And that's continued on. And so the battle goes on here between these, Haman, an Amalekite, and Mordecai, a Jew. Servant of God. And so those are the things we're talking about here. And it all begins here when the fact that Haman is promoted. Of all the princes that served there in the land of Persia, the empire of Persia, this man Haman has been chosen to be head of all the others. And as a result of that, he has certain things that are required by the king of the people that they would honor this man by bowing down and doing obedience to him in his presence, whenever he came to their presence. But Mordecai refused to do that. And so that's where the problems began. And we want to begin by looking at these first 6 verses, to look at that and then talk about this as we go through the struggle that comes about and why it's happening here. So beginning at verse 1 and read through verse 6, it says, "After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and did obedience to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or do obedience to him. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, 'Why do you transgress the king's command?' And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. And they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's words would avail. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or do obedience to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus." And so it all begins here with the promotion of Haman and being put in that position of honor, where he's above all the other princes in all the land of Persia. He is an Agagite. Josephus is one that says he was an Amalekite. And when we say an Agagite, he's a descendant of Agag. And remember, Agag was the king that, for whatever reason, Saul spared his life, and later Samuel, the prophet of God, killed this man Agag, because God had commanded all of them to be killed. So he's an Agagite. He's a descendant, evidently, of that king, Agag, but he is also there of the people of the Amalekites. And he is the one here on this time. Some people believe that the reason he was chosen, and really, you look at it, can you think of any reason why this man, Haman, would have been chosen? When you know everything about him throughout the book of Esther, the things you learn about him, is there anything you see about him that think, man, here's a leader of men. Here's the person I'd want to put over all the other princes. Do you see anything worthwhile in him? I don't. I don't see any qualities about this man that would make him a great leader. And so as I was reading through different things that people said about him, it was interesting that some of them said, hey, there's no reason behind the decision a king might make in who he wants to choose to be his leader. If it's just somebody that has struck his fancy that he thinks is that he likes for whatever reason, that he might choose him to be the leader without necessarily being anyone that has leadership abilities. I know when God chose Saul, I'd often thought, why in the world did God choose Saul to be the leader, to be the king of Israel, when you see what he's like in life? But when you look at the life of Saul, and I've talked about this before, I can find at least 9 qualities of great leadership in Saul. Now, later on, he didn't live up to all those things, and there were great changes in him, but he had those qualities to begin with when God chose him. But I can't see anything in this man, Haman. any kind of a quality that would make him a great leader as to why the king Ahasuerus would choose him to be the king. But some people said, it may have been, he had been a prince prior to this. He would have been one among those nations that had been conquered by Persia and brought in, and he may have been one of the princes of the nation of the Amalekites that were conquered. And so for that reason, he may have chosen to be a leader. That was the case, I think, with Israel, when Israel was conquered by Babylon and were carried away into captivity. I think I've got this passage up here I want to read. It's in regard to King Jehoiakim of Israel. Well, I thought I'd put that up here, but maybe I don't. Someone turn, if you would, 2 Kings chapter 25 and verse 28. 2 Kings chapter 25 and verse 28. Someone have that for us? Or please, Darnell. Okay, that's talking about Jehoiakim. King of Babylon gave Jehoiakim there, was kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. There were other kings, other nations that Babylon had conquered, and they've been brought as prisoners into Babylon. But for some reason, Jehoiakim was made above all the others because he had been king at the time that it was conquered, had been king there in Israel. And so he was promoted. So maybe that's all it is. Maybe this man, Haman, had been a prince before among the Amalekites. And so when he's captured and brought in, maybe that's the reason why he chooses him at this time, to be head over all the others. And all the people bowed down to this man and did obedience to him because that's what the king had commanded. All of them except Mordecai. Mordecai refused to reverence him. That's the word that's used in some of the translations. Refused to show that reverence to him and bowing down to him. Now, when we think about this and why he did it, he had those friends among him that kept on saying, why don't you bow down to him? I mean, they were all bowing down to Haman. Why don't you do it? Maybe they were doing this out of consideration for Mordecai. They might have been fearing, hey, look, if you don't bow down to this guy, what could happen? You're going to be violating the command the king has given. The king himself has commanded that everybody needs to bow down to Haman and do obedience to him. So if you don't do that, you may come under the wrath of the king. So they're trying to encourage him to bow down and show that honor to him. But he refuses. And what reason did he give them? I'm a Jew. Now, evidently, that didn't really explain to the people why. As a Jew, you couldn't do this. But there were certain reasons why, as a Jew, that he would not bow down and do obedience to this man. And one of the reasons it's given most of the time is that what Haman is demanding of him is more than just allegiance, but is demanding worship of him. Did people ever bow down to the kings of Israel or Judah? The answer is yes, they did. And they were never reprimanded for that. It was something that would not have been a violation of God's law to bow down to him. That's showing reverence, honor for someone who's the king. And so that would not have been wrong. But there's more than just showing, respect and honor for someone who's the leader of the nation. Many of them say that he's asking for worship from them. And we look at why. The word reference there, the Hebrew word, and I'm not sure on the pronunciation of it, shakan, it looks like. And according to the dictionary of the Hebrew language here, what this word means is, it means reference, to prostrate oneself in homage to royalty or to God, to worship. And so, because of that reason, it's been explained by many. This is why Mordecai refused to bow down to this man. Because it's not just asking for honor in his role as a leader, but it's asking for people to actually worship him. Now, there's some other things that have been said about that. Adam Clark said of this word, he says that Haman expected what the Persian kings frequently received, a species of divine adoration. And this is implied in the word shakan, which signifies that kind of prostration which implies the highest degree of reverence that can be paid to God or man. And it requires a person to lay down flat on the earth with their hands and the feet extended and their mouth to the dust. And that's what was being expected of him. Well, if that's true, then we understand why Mordecai as a Jew would not do that. That's a violation of the very first command that God had given to them. You shall have no other gods before you. You shall not bow down to them. So he refuses to do that for that very reason. Now, there's another reason that's given in the Targum. Now, the Targum, and we've talked about this before, basically are kind of like a commentary, I guess. It was something written by the rabbis to explain the Hebrew to many of the Jews who, because they're in captivity outside of their native country, many of them have lost a lot of their understanding of their native language of Hebrew, and many of them have lost an understanding of it completely. They don't speak it anymore. They speak the language of the Babylonians, the Chaldean language. And so they wrote these books to explain to them what the Hebrew words were talking about and what it meant. And according to the Targum explaining here about why Mordecai didn't bow down to them, they're claiming that Haman had set up a statue for himself to which everyone was obliged to bow down and to adore Haman himself. Now, you know, the Bible doesn't say anything about that. That's what some of the rabbis have said about it in explaining why Mordecai refused to bow down. We don't know if that's true or not. But whether he's got this statue of himself to bow down to, the word itself, it says he's expecting the people to bow down to him in the same way that one would bow down to God and expect that reverence from him. The book of Psalms, chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. It's a very short psalm, and in that psalm, David begins by raising two questions. And the questions are, beginning there, it says, O Lord, who shall sojourn in thy tent? Who shall dwell on thy holy hill? David's raising two questions here, and then he gives the answer in part to those two questions. In verse 4, he says, in whose eyes a reprobate is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. So here's David saying, who is it that is going to dwell or sojourn in God's tent, and who shall dwell on thy holy hill? And in part it says, listen, the individual that's going to dwell in my tent, God says, is the individual in whose eyes a reprobate is despised. Well, Haman certainly qualifies as a reprobate. And so he's one who would be despised in the eyes of those who really follow God and serve God. And the person who's going to live forever in God's tent is the one who will despise those people who are reprobates. And so many believe that this is the idea here with Mordecai. He looks at Haman as a man who is a reprobate. And so he despises him and refuses to give that honor to him in any way. And so he won't do it. But like I said, he's got those people keep trying to persuade him to go ahead and pay honor to Mordecai. And he never does. So what do his friends, quote, friends do? They go tell Naaman about this. And it probably may be that when Naaman was there in their presence and all these people are bowing down, Mordecai's not bowing down and he doesn't notice it. But now these people go tell on him and tell about it. Now, I never thought anything about this, but it was kind of interesting to me what Brother Burton Kaufman said in regard to this when they refused to do it. He says the thing that stands out, about this is that it's a tattletale. And Kaufman makes this statement. He said, talebearers in all generations have deserved the contempt in which they are generally held. These talebearers were the cause of many thousands of deaths which ultimately resulted from Haman's hatred. You know, because they went and told Haman about it. And when Haman learned about it, then it says when Haman saw, so evidently Haman paid attention the next time he's in that area. And he's not concerned about anybody, not anybody else, but he's looking at Mordecai. And he knows Mordecai doesn't bow down to me. And the text says he was filled with fury. Hatred. But it's not just hatred at Mordecai. His hatred is toward who? Toward all the Jews. And it's not just all the Jews that are there in the capital city of Susa, but it's those in all the provinces. And you got to remember, Israel is a province now of the Persian Empire. And those who've gone back from captivity, who left Babylon from that captivity and went back to Israel, they're not safe because they're now in one of the provinces, and they're one of the ones that come under the hatred of Haman and whose desire is to destroy them. And so he says here, he goes on to talk about, he says, the one thing that stands out in this paragraph is the egotistical pride of Haman. Only one man in a multitude did not bow down to him, and he was at once angry enough to kill an entire race of people. Isn't that something? You can have one person that infuriates you, and your desire is to kill off every one of those people. And it's just hard to believe that people are like that. But that's this man Haman. And that's his desire now, is to be able to kill off all of the Jews because of what one man, Mordecai, has done to them. And Matthew Henry said of this, he said, herein appear Haman's intolerable pride, insatiable cruelty, and the ancient anger of an Amalekite to the Israel of God. He sees that same hatred that the Amalekites had in times past toward Israel that's being carried on now still by this man Haman. And the fact that he learns that Mordecai is a Jew, that only intensifies his fury and his anger and his desire to be able to destroy every one of them. So he begins then his plot to bring about this destruction of the Jewish people. This verses 7 through 15, where he talks about this. And we're going to look at all of it, but I want to begin first of all just looking at a couple of verses and his desire and his plans to utterly destroy all of the Jewish nation. So look at those two verses 7 and 8. I hope up there, yeah. It says, in the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pure, that is the lot, before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month, till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not for the king's profit to tolerate them. So the casting of pure, and it explains here, or lot, as it describes it here. And there was a French archaeologist who back, I think, sometime in the 50s, discovered while they were excavating there, they discovered a quadrangle, four-sided figure, which had the numbers on it. I think it was 2, 5, 6, and 8. And that's the thing they would cast. And they would do this month after month. Well, what's the purpose for casting a lot? For making a decision. And so what Haman is after is he's trying to find out what's the best time to begin my plan. When's the best time to set a day for killing all the Jews? And they want it to be a lucky day. And so that's why they're casting month after month. And eventually what's going to happen is it's going to show you down later, till the 12th month they're doing that, which is the month of Adar. And it's on that 12th month that they finally decide. All right, that's the time. And the month of Adar, the 12th month, is when we're going to do this. But you notice also it says they did it day by day, or day after day, they're casting that lot. Now, what day in that month is going to be best? And you get the month that's going to mention here, or the day, the 13th day. And so that's the day that he establishes for the day to begin the killing of all these Jews. Because he considers that's the lucky day. It's come up in the lot. But who else cast lots besides the Persians? Huh? All right, the soldiers at the cross of Christ casting lots to determine who's going to get the robe of Christ that's not been torn. The people on the boat with Jonah trying to figure out, why the storm is coming up. The apostles, they cast lots. Why do they cast lots? Yeah, so who's going to take the place of Judas to serve as priest? But there's so many times in the Bible where you do find not just these nations do it, but you find the people of God casting lots to do that. Now, in casting these lots, 1 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 42. If someone will turn to that and read it. 1 Samuel 14 and verse 42. Charlotte, do you have that? Or if you'll read that for us, please. Okay. If you remember the story, what's happened there is the time that Israel's in battle and they're chasing their enemies, and Saul has given the command that nobody is to eat anything, till they finish this battle. Jonathan, his son, didn't hear what his father had said, and so as he's in the battle, he sees a honeycomb, honey there on the ground, and he takes the staff or the spear that he had and touches it down into it and eats that honey. And so when it found out about this, Saul is angry, and he's determined to find out who did it. He said, even if it's my son Jonathan, the person that did that's going to die. And so how's he going to do that? We're going to cast a lot. And he says, we're going to cast a lot to be between me and Jonathan and the rest of Israel. And they cast a lot, and it's Jonathan and Saul that are chosen. So we'll cast a lot again between Jonathan and Saul, and Jonathan is chosen. And so he's going to have Jonathan put to death. Well, the people saved Jonathan. They're not going to let that happen. Not going to let the king put to death his own son. But they used a lot to determine and to learn who it was that had done this. So God's people did this. But what's the difference between Israel when they're casting the lot and when these nations are casting the lot? When the apostles cast lots to determine who's going to replace Judas, did they cast those lots, and you cast it and it lands on Matthias, and whew, boy, Matthias, you're a lucky person. It just happened to fall on you. Did it? No. God did it. And the Bible lets us know among Israel's people that God's the one who determines it. And God did that for his people and allowed them to do that to determine what God's will was as to who's to be chosen. But these people among the Persians, when Haman and them were doing that, they just seen this, this is going to be the lucky time for doing it. They don't see God or anyone else directing that. It just happens. But because it just happened, that's the day that they're going to do it on. That's the lucky day for them. They don't see it as being something that's the work of God. And so they're casting the lots for that reason. And so they've determined the time that this is going to be done, but he hasn't even told the king yet about it. And so verse 8 is going to start dealing with that. Haman goes to King Ahasuerus to talk to him. And notice how he begins everything. He begins first of all saying there is a certain people scattered abroad. Let's see, I'll get to where I had that here. There's a certain people scattered abroad, dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not for the king's profit to tolerate them. I think when we see this, when he's talking to King Ahasuerus and he tells him these certain things, he has a certain way of going about revealing to the king what he wants to get done. And he does it in a way that he thinks that's going to be best for being able to accomplish what he wants to be done. And I had several things about this that I want to talk about in regard to this. First of all, when he begins, he says, there is a certain people. He doesn't identify them. Why would he not do that? Right. He doesn't know how the king might respond to it if he knows it's the Jewish people. So why would Haman go about it this way and say there is a certain people? Yeah. And besides, if he doesn't identify them, that helps build up prejudice toward these people. You know that they're nobody. They're not even worth mentioning who they are. They're certain people. He doesn't identify them by name. Some suggest that he did this from fear that if known by the king, he might not have so readily agreed with Haman. Well, that's true, and it's not because Esther is a Jew, because the king doesn't know that. She hasn't told anybody about that. But still, he doesn't know how the king feels toward the Jewish people, and how he feels about Mordecai. And so he doesn't want that to be known, trying to build up prejudice to them. And also, someone said it's easier to agree to the death of someone that you don't know. If it's somebody you know, it makes all the difference in the world. You're not going to be so eager to agree, hey, yeah, we need to have this person or these people put to death. And so also it gives to them a legitimacy if you name them. It says, in fact, hey, these people are that. They're people. And it's just intriguing to me in history. Throughout history, you can see how people develop a prejudice toward others. And by developing, not just for themselves, but the way they do things to make everybody else become prejudiced toward them, to get what they want done to them. He continues about them, though, and he talks about other things. He says, they're found in all the provinces of the kingdom. How many provinces are there? 127. That very first part of the chapter 1, he talks about 127 provinces. So they're throughout your kingdom in all the provinces. Oh, what significance is that? How does that help Haman anyway? What's that? Yeah, they're everywhere. And they're not located in one central place where you can keep an eye on them and kind of control them. They're scattered throughout your kingdom. And there's no way you're going to be able to control all these people and to look and see what they've done. And so it's building prejudice against them, again, in that way. They're in all these different provinces where you make up your kingdom. And then he says about these people, their laws are different from all those of the other people. So how does that help Haman build up his prejudice toward these people? Yeah, they don't follow the rules. There's a lot that can be said about that. These people have their own law, and they follow their law and not your law. And so, in effect, it's like they're in your kingdom, but don't kid yourself, king. They're not your subjects. They have someone else that they look to as their king. And that part would certainly be true. They as Jewish people recognize God as their leader, and He's the one whose rules they follow, whose laws they're obedient to. And so, that, but just the very fact when he says their laws are different, emphasize that word different. If you want to build prejudice against somebody, it seems like that'd be one of the first things you want to do. They're different from everybody else. They're not like us. You know, and I think about the Jewish people throughout history, how that's been against them. In Germany, when Hitler came to power, and they developed their final solution for getting rid of all the Jews. And looking at the propaganda they spread about it and the posters that they had put up, the Jews were described as rats. You know, and in the drawings, you'd have these rats scattering everywhere. And well, why? Well, rats carry disease. The bubonic plague that wiped out almost all of Europe at one time was carried by fleas on these rats. And have you ever had to kill a rat? You ever set a rat trap? Did you lose sleep over that? Think of all the horrible things that I've done? No. You don't feel any remorse for that. And so that's a way of building prejudice against them. That's what Haman's doing. There are some people here in your country that are different from us. They have different laws that they follow. And so, you know, when he gets finally to the point, you know, about what he wants to do, you know, he says, they do not keep the king's law. That would really anger the king to know they're not keeping his laws. Well, they weren't violating the laws of the kings, but they did have another law that they followed. But that builds up the prejudice. So eventually, when he does let the king know who he's talking about, and even before he lets him know, he gets the king's approval to do it. But it's because he's built up that prejudice. Now, as I thought about that, I thought about, you know, you look at the life of Jesus and how the people build up prejudice against him so that the multitudes will cry out, crucify him, crucify him. His enemies referred to Jesus as a man that was gluttonous and a wine bibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. He eats too much and drinks too much. And look who he associates with. He doesn't associate with those of us who are Pharisees. He associates with those people who are sinners, building up prejudice against him. The Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. And then they said of Jesus that he didn't keep the law of the land. They accused him of violating the very laws that God had given. They said to him, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ the King. And so they say to the Romans, hey, listen, he doesn't even follow your laws. He doesn't recognize Caesar as being king. He claims he's the king. And if you'll remember, that's one of the things that caught the attention real quick of Pilate in regard to him. So it's just a way you have of building up prejudice against people. When Pilate asked what accusations they had against him, they said, if he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up to thee. In other words, they didn't have specific laws he had broken. They were saying, if he hadn't been a lawbreaker, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Yeah, but what laws did he break? Isn't it enough just to know he's a lawbreaker? And that's why they want to do it. And that's what's happening here with the Jews. Haman's not saying, you know, he said, they don't keep your laws. Well, what laws have they broken? Doesn't have any. There's only one law that I know the king's given that they've broken. And so far as I know, only one man broke that law. And that was Mordecai. He didn't bow down and do obeisance to this man Haman, like the king had commanded. So, okay, there's one law that one person broke. But he doesn't even talk about that. He wants to give the impression this is every one of these people are breaking your laws. They're not living the way that you've wanted them to do. And so building up that prejudice in to bring about this hatred for the Jews that they might be put to death. Excuse me. So then he says, by the last, he says, so that it is not for the king's profit to tolerate them. Now, what does that mean? It's not for the king's profit. That's the rendition here of the Revised Standard Version. It's not in his interest. Well, in what sense is it not in his interest? Yeah. You know, and I think I didn't check to make sure on this, but the Revised Standard Version says it's not for your profit. These people aren't beneficial to your kingdom. They don't profit you in any way. And if they don't profit you in any way and we kill them all off, you haven't lost anything. In fact, you probably have gained something. And we're going to see that. That's the whole idea behind all of this, to get at prejudice so that he might bring about their destruction. And we talk about similar accusations made against the disciples. Acts 16, 20 and 21. And when they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, "These men are Jews, and they are disturbing our city. They advocate customs which it is not lawful for us Romans to accept or practice." Again, there are no specific laws that they bring against the disciples that they've broken or violated against Rome. Just, hey, what have they done? Well, they're disturbing our city, number one. Well, how? Well, they don't talk about that. And they're teaching us to do things that aren't lawful for us to do. Well, what thing? Well, they don't have any things to tell them. And so it's just a way, again, to continue building up prejudice against them. They don't keep the king's law. It's not in the king's profit to tolerate them. Then, the next part, I want to get to this before we close. We don't have about 5 minutes left. Verses 9 to 11. So he says, "If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasury." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." King gives his approval to this. But I really want to look at verse 9 there. First of all, he says, "If it please the king." Haman knows he doesn't have the right. He can't make the law. He can't make that decision to do what he wants to do, have the Jews killed. And so he says, if it pleases the king. You know, I want to know it's up to you to decide. If this is what you decide on. When we pray to God, you know, we pray if it's your will. And that's basically what he's saying to the king, you know, if this is what you want, you know. But what is it he wants? He wants them to let it be decreed. Let there be a law made, and you sign it, that these people are to be put to death. Well, why do that? Yeah, number one, it's a law that, according to the Medes and Persians, it cannot be changed. Even the king can't change that law once he's made it. But I think Haman may have another reason for doing that. If the Jews are put to death because the king made a law, who's going to get the blame? The king, not Haman. You know, he's protecting himself in a sense in doing that. But then to really seal the deal, to make it worthwhile to the king. He's already told him, you know, losing all these people, it's not going to hurt you. You're not going to lose any profit out of that. But here's what I'll do for you. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have the charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. 10,000 talents of silver. We're not sure about the talent that he's talking about. But if it's one talent, we've talked about before, that was used in ancient days, a talent was a measure of weight. And a talent weighed at 75 pounds. So if he said, I'm going to give you 10,000 talents, he's talking about giving to you 750,000 pounds of silver. And so multiply that to find out how many ounces you would have in that. And I see, I think I put that down here to how much that would be. And I think it came out to be something like, 12 million ounces. So I got online and looked it up. Silver today is worth $14.78 an ounce. So multiply that out, comes out to $178,320,000 in today's money. Yes. Well, number one, but for some reason, whatever it is, he likes Haman. That's why he's chosen him to be head of all the others. He likes him. And Haman is doing a good job of building up prejudice. You know, the things that he said to say, you know, it's building up in the king's mind. The king, you know, I don't know who these people are, but they don't need to be a part of my kingdom. If they're not going to keep my laws, if they're not going to be a prophet to me, we don't need to have them around. They're dangerous people. They could rebel against me at any time, and then I might lose my kingdom. I mean, that would be the thinking, I believe, that would go in the mind of that king. And then when he turns out, plus, I'm going to gain all this money that he's given to me. Well, now here's a question. Where's Haman going to get that kind of money? Or does he have it already? You know, there's a possibility he could have that much money. It may have had been a reason that he was chosen. He was very wealthy. Yeah. I mean, there have been examples been given over and over of people in those ancient days who had untold wealth like this. It was a time when silver was far more abundant than it is today. You know, and so people had a lot more of it. There was one gentleman that said that they said he had 2,000 talents of silver. But he had much more of that in gold. So he had millions and millions of dollars that he had, and he was not a big-time leader in the world. A lot of people had it, so he could have had it. Plus, some people believe that he thought maybe the king won't accept the payment. Hey, let me pick up that tab. No, I get it. And maybe he's thinking that the king would be like that. And after all, the king does say something here about when he's offered all that, he tells him the money is given to you. Well, it may be the money that he's going to use to give to the king to pay that off is going to come from what source? The Jews that are put to death. Let's see if I got that. Yeah, verse 13, we hadn't got to. It says, letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to slay, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. You know, when the Jews were destroyed, over 6 million of them destroyed by the Germans, all the wealth they took from them. I mean, they took everything from them. They pulled the teeth of those that had gold teeth. They took all their property, all the money they had, they robbed from them. And that included also, you know, in taking all the paintings they had that were some worth millions of dollars. And a lot of it still hasn't been found. And a lot of people believe that Odessa and other groups that supported the German Nazis in escaping from Germany and getting over into South America, and many of them still not accounted for. I know our time's gone to stop, but I just finished reading the book, The Killing of the SS, and it tells about a lot of that and the wealth that they took from them. So the wealth he's getting from all those Jews are going to be put to death, taking everything they own. Would be enough money that he could have used to give that to the king. But the king says to him here, that money is yours. So he's been well there. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you again for allowing us the time to be here this night, and we pray you'll be with us and continue to keep us safe and in your care as we travel home, and bless us and allow us the privilege of being here, Father, this coming Sunday, that we might again be in worship of Thee, and that we might, Father, be able to profit by our time to study Your Word together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.